Mhm. Okay, Mr. Marshall, the attendees are coming in. You have a quorum of the board. You are the co-host of this meeting. We have Nate Malloy with us in the house tonight. We are recording. I believe we are good to go.
All right, thank you, Pam.
You're welcome.
Welcome to the Amherst Planning Board meeting of April 22nd, 2026. My name is Doug Marshall, and as chair of the Amherst Planning Board, I'm calling this meeting to order at 6:40 p.m. This meeting is being recorded and is available live stream via Amherst Media. Minutes are being taken. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, extended by Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, and further extended by Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2025, this planning board meeting will be conducted via remote means using the Zoom platform. The Zoom meeting link is available on the meeting agenda, posted on the town website's calendar listing for this meeting. Or go to the planning board webpage and click on the most recent agenda, where the Zoom link is listed at the top of the page. No in-person attendance of the public is permitted. However, every effort will be made to ensure the public can access the meeting in real time via technological means. In the event public access is disrupted for reasons of economic hardship or despite our best efforts, we will post an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting on the town's website. Board members, I will take a roll call. When I call your name, unmute yourself, answer affirmatively, and return to mute. We know that Bruce Coldham is absent this evening. I'm going to call Fred Hartwell, but I don't believe he can hear us at the moment. It looks like maybe he can hear us, but we are not getting audio from him. So I am just going to say I think I saw his lips move that he was present. Jesse Major.
I'm present.
Hi, Doug Marshall, I'm present. Angus McLeod.
Present.
Johanna Newman.
Present.
And Jara Smith.
Present.
Thank you all. Board members, if technical issues arise and the discussion needs to pause, it will be noted in the minutes. Please use the raise hand function to ask a question or make a comment, and I will call on you to speak. After speaking, remember to remute yourself. To the general public comment item is reserved for public comment regarding items not appearing later on tonight's agenda. Please be aware the board will not respond to comments during the general public comment period. Public comment may also be heard at other times during the meeting when deemed appropriate by the planning board chair. Please indicate you wish to make a comment by clicking the raise hand button when public comment is solicited. If you have joined the Zoom meeting using a telephone, please indicate you wish to make a comment by pressing *9 on your phone. When called on, please identify yourself by stating your full name and address, and put yourself back into mute when finished speaking. Residents can express their views for up to 3 minutes or at the discretion of the planning board chair. If a speaker does not comply with these guidelines or exceeds their allotted time, their participation may be disconnected from the meeting. Okay, the time now is 6:43. We'll go to our first item on our agenda, and that is the approval or a discussion about minutes. We have the minutes from January 21st of this year available for approval. Is there any board discussion of these minutes? Not seeing any hands. Does anybody want to make the motion or second the motion to, Johanna, you got your hand up first?
Move to approve the minutes from January 21st.
Thank you. And Jesse?
I'll second that.
Thank you both. Any further discussion by board members of these minutes? All right, we'll go ahead with the vote for the minutes of January 21st. Skipping Fred, we will start with Angus
Aye.
and Jesse,
Aye.
Johanna,
Aye.
and Jera.
Aye.
I'm an aye as well. Fred, if you can hear us and you approve the minutes, please raise your arm and tell it just to indicate you can hear us. All right, I'm not seeing any response from Fred on that, so we'll just record this as 5 votes in favor and let's say 2 members absent or not participating. Okay, Fred, can you hear us?
I'm now hearing you.
All right, you're gonna need to mute one of your, probably one of your speakers or something.
Yep.
I just muted Fred. But not both of his connections.
Oh, no. Okay.
All right.
I just took care of that. Yeah, that was some bad feedback.
Yeah. So
Okay,
Fred,
I've got.
Oh.
all right. So as I said, I think we'll record this as 5 members in favor of the minutes and 2 members, one member having technological issues and 1 member absent. Now we'll go to the public comment period. Time is 6:46. So members of the public, if you want to make a comment about something that's not later on tonight's agenda, please raise your hand at this time. I typically read the names of the public attendees that I can see, so I will do so now. There are 5. They are Eric Bachrock, Jennifer Taub, Mark Walmsley, Maura Keene, and Pam Rooney. So as of right now, I don't see any hands raised. All right, sounds like Fred's still having some issues. All right, that's the public comment period. Now we'll go to the downtown design standards. Nate, do you want to say anything about these? We've had them on the last couple of meeting agendas. You're
Right.
soliciting comments in general.
The downtown design standards.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there was some public comment in the packet that someone submitted. You know, we're still working with Dodson and Flinker. They had some technical issues going to the Historical Commission and Commissions for Persons with Disabilities the other week, so they're going to be doing that in May. We're still, we're still collecting public comment, so planning board members feel free to use the form or email me. I mean, really, we're trying to encourage everyone to use the form that's set up. It's structured in a way that the consultants can then, use it. So it's more, if someone really doesn't like something, you can just say that. You can reference a page, but they're trying to get to the specifics. The CRC had a preview of the standards, and there was a lot of questions. I mean, so I think the planning board, for instance, I talked about, could we reorganize the districts, like maybe go from 4 to 3, and the CRC had some bigger picture questions. And I think what I said to them is something. I think what I said to you is, I think staff can provide a cover memo or a memo to the consultants, and that can go, maybe as an appendix. All public comments can be part of an appendix. But at some point, staff and the consultants would make a decision. Like at this point, we're not going to redraw boundaries, for instance, and wildly change things. I think that's a local decision. If after this process, the planning board and others like, wow, we really want to do something different, I think that's something the staff and the planning board can do. We're not going to ask Dodson to say, okay, now let's draw the boundary to, up North Pleasant Street, half a mile or something. And so, I think someone would be looking at the different districts they have in the standards. Again, are there pieces that seem questionable that you like or have comments? If we don't think that that one district is, say, impactful enough, right, actually doesn't incentivize redevelopment, that can be a pretty strong comment that goes in the memo. And then that's something the town can decide, how do we want to work with what they provided us. You know,
So, Nate-
the CRC has kind of similar questions, like, you know.
So Nate, right now you're looking for comments that might cause Dodson and Flinker to amend or revise their work product, I guess I'd say. And so at the end of that process, then town council, CRC, planning board, whoever else is involved can figure out how do we want to go forward with their final work product. Is that right?
Right, and how the planning board may want to adopt it. You know, would you want the design guidelines to be part of the rules and regs, or pieces of it that could be used pretty quickly? And then would we move forward and, you know, suggest a suite of zoning changes to implement the vision? And so, you know, do we like what they're proposing? Do we like, you know, traditional Main Street and modern Main Street districts? Do we like all of them or just a few of them? And, you know, does the board, and, you know, working with staff, like who wants to move that forward? I think, you know, Dodson had explained that it could be incremental steps to get there. I guess my worry there is we never get there. You know, you increase the setbacks, but you never do anything with the height or the design. And so, you know, I think we never answered exactly how these would be incorporated into the zoning bylaw. I think the easiest way is to do it by reference. And so in section 3, in the use chart, in certain areas, they get referenced, and then they can be incorporated into the rules and regs of the planning board. Maybe they're in addition to the design review principles, but they become, you know, reinforced in a number of ways. There's zoning pieces that are necessary to implement that vision, right? So, you know, height, setbacks, lot coverage, building coverage, maybe the additional lot area per unit, even uses, what are allowed in mixed use buildings, maybe the mixed use building standards. So there's all these pieces. I mean, there could be, you know, 24 little pieces that add up to that vision for parts of downtown. And so, you know, to me, it's like, all right, are those pieces, is the vision good? For instance, if we're like, wow, we're not sure about this vision, that can be a comment. And maybe, you know, that, you know, we can ask Dodson to describe that a little bit more in the report. But, you know, it seemed like the working group all kind of agreed on the vision. They actually like the different districts and kind of the design intent of those. It's now the, you know, the details of like, okay, what really is the proper build out, or is it enough, or is the, you know, is it too big, is it too small, the design review area? And you know, I think it'd be good to have Dodson understand that. For instance, I think some members of the CRC said, you know, they questioned the west of Kendrick Park, like really what is the right height there? And, you know, so, you know, is it 4 floors under the roof along the street? And maybe if you allow development in the back, maybe, you know, we cap it at 3, for instance, right? I don't, you know, are there things that we would want to look at that could make some, you know, changes to it? Some of the CRC members said, oh, some of your districts, a few properties I think could be part of this district and not the other one. And I think that's reasonable, but to say like, you know, let's do away with like village downtown or whatever it's called and replace it with something, I think we can put it in there, but I wouldn't ask Dodson to do that. I think that's a local discussion after. And we haven't really determined what's the best adoption method. You know, I think some of it is zoning, some of it is rules and regs, some of it is, you know, it can be a design review manual that is used by the planning board and the DRB. I would like to strengthen it a little bit more in terms of its regulatory powers, right? Rather than being something we refer to, can we pull some of those things in? So, you know, someone comes in again and it's like, we don't really want a 5-story building right on the sidewalk. You know, I mean, if we think we want like a 15-foot wide sidewalk, sure, that's okay to be on the sidewalk. But if we have a 5-foot sidewalk, maybe that's not okay. And so we have to figure out, how do we get there if, you know, if we really want to have that wide sidewalk. And if we're not really concerned about the design of the building, okay, but maybe this study is going to inform some zoning changes that need to happen downtown. Because, you know, it seems like enough people question some of the things, we're not getting exactly what we might want. And it's hard with site plan review when a developer comes in and says, well, the zoning bylaw says this or this, you know, I really can't do 5. It's, you know, the project can't happen. And, you know, it's really hard for the board or staff to say, well, of course it can still happen. And so I think the standards are trying to say, well, to get this vision, to have a nice streetscape, here are the setbacks we need. I think that's important. So, you know, do we step back the upper floors or just the upper floor? Do we break up the massing of a facade? You know, why does some buildings in their visual preference survey not score very well? Is it materials? Is it the kind of rhythm and pattern of massing and voiding? Is it the breakup between the first floor and the upper floors? And so to me, all those pieces can somehow be incorporated into whether it's zoning or something. So when someone comes in downtown and is proposing a new building, to me, it's like we, as staff, we tell the applicant, hey, look, here's what's on the books. Here's what the planning board is going to look at. Make these few changes. Yeah, and it's a site plan review use, but you're going to make, it's going to be a lot nicer of a project, right? We're going to have a great, vibrant street. You're going to have this and this. And right now, it's sometimes this doesn't get there. It's harder with an applicant when we don't have clear guidance. So I don't,
All right.
not specifics, right? So anyways, if you have comments tonight, if you want to fill out the form.
All right. I need to correct you or say that as a member of the working group, I don't think it's really true that we all bought into the entire vision. I think the working group was pretty bifurcated. In the way that most of this the discussion about development in Amherst has been bifurcated. There's a group that wants more development and there's a group that wants less. And I don't feel like the two groups ever came together in terms of the discussion and the comments. But I think Dodson tried to split the difference and come up with a compromise.
Sure. I mean, I think for me, the vision is, they had those few phrases, right? We want like an inclusive community with like vibrant streetscapes and be resilient. And so to me, that's the vision. It sounds like what I've heard from Dodson is that the working group agreed on those and those principles. It's then, how do we actually get there is what's different. Maybe some people want to not have any change because they think it meets that now. And other people are like, wait a minute,
Right.
It doesn't. So I think to me, that's the important piece is like people agreed on, right, some of that vision, those principles. It's now how do we kind of modify it and tailor it to work, because otherwise, Dodson, I think, has done a great job of doing existing conditions assessment. I think it's funny, the planning board asked and the CRC asked, do we want it to just stay the existing conditions assessment or how do we use that to maybe change? And I think that's a really good question because I think they did a really good job of understanding the fabric of downtown and kind of the quirks of these little, like they had the hinge and they had this area and this area. And so what do you do with that? Do we say, sure, we just like it the way it is and we'll let those buildings stay there? Or can you take some of that information and adapt it and allow for some new development or some change? And so, yeah, I agree, Doug. What I've heard is the working group couldn't agree on that part of it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I guess the message for tonight is just you're still soliciting comments. We can do it through the form. We can probably send you comments directly. At some point, you may do some sort of summary memo of the discussion of the board. We had a fair amount of discussion in one of the meetings earlier this spring, but we haven't had very much lately. So members, are there any comments you want to make tonight for Nate to add to his list? I think I made some comments earlier. Fred.
Yeah.
Fred, I see you 3 times as a panelist, and so
Yeah.
it seems like whatever you're on is working, which may be a laptop. So if you disconnected your desktop and your phone, then there wouldn't be
Yeah, Fred, if you're able to find one device that works for everything, then you can shut off all the other ones. And so why don't we go to Jara while we're waiting, and we'll come back to Fred.
Thank you. Well, Nate, first of all, I just have to say that we're really going to miss you and thank you for everything. I'm sorry if that is later on the agenda, but because I joined late, I just had to upfront say that. What would be helpful for me to understand is this proposal, it expands the size of the downtown design review district, or does it maintain the existing boundaries?
Yeah,
I mean, I get like that's one, to your point, like this could be adopted in any millions of different ways, but the geographic like coverage, I'm curious, is how has that changed between what we
yeah.
have and
What Dotson had showed, was a map that, was those different districts they came up with. So to implement what they showed, you actually, there has to be zoning changes in
right.
terms of how this could be applied by the design review board. There's a design review district. We actually haven't determined what happens with the design review board in that design review district.
Got it. Okay.
So,
Okay.
right. So it could be that, these could be adopted as a planning board as part of the rules and regs without zoning changes, and then you're really working with the design piece, and the design review board could also be using them. And so I think those are things, Dotson has asked this, they asked earlier, and we didn't have an answer. I think some of it was just seeing what could happen. So, some thoughts are like, give the design review more regulatory authority. Maybe they have a permit they issue, or
Could we
you know,
have like an implementation workshop with them and like figure out like what's the best way to, or like what is their, I'm curious what their recommendation is for a path forward for some of these, or like what the trade-offs are from
Right.
one or the other.
Thanks. Yeah.
Is that something we could do?
Yeah, I think it's something we can relay. I can talk to Jeff and others about. Yeah, I think it's helpful. We had talked about having the boards meet again in May. I don't know, maybe now June, but having a few boards and committees come together and talk about them a little bit as well. Okay, like where are we? What's happening with these standards? So,
Great.
All right, Fred, you still have 3 connections to this meeting.
Well,
Pam,
I
can you
could
boot 2 of Fred's?
I could remove
Yeah,
the
I have
question
been
is,
reluctant to do it, but now that he has his hand raised, I'm going to go ahead and remove the other 2.
all right,
And fingers crossed, we don't lose him.
yeah.
Remove.
how's this? Nope. Oh, I'm getting.
Okay. Oh, he put his hand down. Fred, if you can hear me, can you put your hand back up? Okay.
All right, so you want to remove that second one?
Yep.
hey, Fred, I think you're all set. Pam removed you from the.
Yeah, so Fred, unmute and let's see if you say something again.
Testing.
Yeah, you're good. We got rid of your other duplicates.
Thank you.
All right. Did you have
welcome.
any comments on the design review standards?
Not
Not that you've been able to think about it yet.
not at the moment.
Okay. All right. Okay, well then I'm going to put down your hand and we'll go on. I also muted you, Fred. All right. I guess before we leave this topic, I will ask any of the now 4 remaining people in the public if they want to make any comments about the downtown design standards before we move on. So members of the public, this is the time for you to raise your hand if you want to comment on the downtown design standards or the process around them at all. All right, I'm not seeing anybody raise their hand. Why don't we go on to the clean energy bylaw? The time now is 7:03. Nate, once again, do you want to introduce this or what?
Yeah, there's a version, I think it's now version 9 that was in the packet. Doug had provided a number of comments. The CRC is meeting tomorrow, and the idea would be that it goes to town council next week, and then, as a zoning amendment referral, and then it would be referred back to the planning board and CRC. So staff has met with representatives from the planning board and CRC to talk about kind of that hearing process. So, if there's any you met earlier and talked about it. So if there are any other questions, I try to relay it with the CRC tomorrow. It is a pretty big document. I've relayed some of the questions about kind of the technical expertise and what's needed, reviewing these. We had the tiered approach in terms of how the size of both kind of accessory uses and then other uses. The planning board would become a permitting board as well as the ZBA, but probably the planning board would see applications where it doesn't now. I don't have any comments at this time. I think it will come back in a hearing probably in May, and then it'll go on into June, maybe July. So for board members, continue to look at it and send questions to staff. I think there is a lot there. The state has some model templates. We tried to cross-reference those. The CRC did to incorporate things that in it. So we try to capture a lot of things. I know at the last meeting we said, well, is it punitive? Is it comprehensive? So if there's specific things as to why, I think we think it is, it's onerous. What is it exactly? Is it the submittal requirements? Is it some of the permitting pieces? Is it dimensional standards? What is there? And then when it comes back to hearing, those can be discussed again. I think the idea is to try to keep it moving forward, knowing that we need a bylaw on the books later this year. So.
All right. So Nate, you have made a record or a note of the comments that several of us made last time, right?
Right. And I think I expressed that to the CRC after at
Okay.
a meeting ago. Yep.
All right. And I remember Johanna made comments and I made comments. I can't remember. We had at least a third member that night, and I'm not sure if it might have been Fred. I'm not sure. Okay. So once again, members, this is the time. This is a sort of a homework assignment. This is the time to get in early comments on the clean energy bylaw before it comes to us in public hearing for a recommendation or not, with specific edits for to recommend to town council. All right. I guess I'm not. Okay, Angus.
Sorry, I just have a question about this. So I listened to the planning board meeting last week when I was sick. And we talked about this, but I think the planning board meeting before that as well when we had the presentation. I guess one of the things that I'm kind of struggling to understand, Nate, if a gas station wanted to build a new gas station somewhere in the comm, how many pages of regulations are there to build like a new gas station in the zoning bylaw?
Oh, I mean, a gas station, you don't see that it's at the end. It's like about 47 pages.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm just kind of kidding. Right. So there isn't a succinct section of the bylaw that would address that, right? So, right, there's a use category, there's some definitions and some other pieces, like any use, right? So right, all told, a few pages, maybe.
Yeah. I guess I just asked because when I was in fourth grade, I won the science fair. And my whole experiment was testing like gasoline runoff in different types of soils. And I ruined all of my mother's Tupperware, and she was very, very annoyed at me. But I guess one of the things that I'm struggling with this 20-page document is just how detailed it is. And on the one hand, that can be helpful for development, right? For having a sense of what you need to do as someone wanting to build solar panels, as someone wanting to build a battery storage system. On the other hand, I guess I would see a gas station as a much worse environmental outcome, knowing issues with runoff, gas spills, people bury gas tanks in the ground. And the idea that we have are potentially putting in place 20 pages of regulations for solar panels when we have nothing for a gas station. I get that this is the technology of the future. This is where things are headed. But I don't know. It's just kind of sitting a little funny with me.
Yeah, I mean, we do regulate where gas stations can be located differently than we do solar. So, solar could happen most places. But yeah, I think, there's the state wants, for anything that's really large, it goes to the state. And then anything, but it's still really big, comes to the local municipality. And, if a developer and applicant chooses, they could go through this consolidated permit, right? So all permits have to be issued within a 12-month period. That's all the way from, land use permits to, building permits, fire, everything, wetland. And so I think, the approach was, okay, let's get a bylaw that really is comprehensive so that during the permitting process, there aren't questions about what's the review and what's happening, because there is a clock that will be ticking. And so, the idea would be, okay, what you need for submittal requirements. An applicant can always still ask for a waiver from those. And so staff could meet with an applicant and they could have, a 10-acre solar and say, look, I don't think I need to do all this stuff, where I am, it's not prime farmland, there's no trees, it's pretty flat, no wetlands. And we could say, okay, that can be part of the first hearing process.
Who says that?
What?
Who says that?
Who says that?
Who makes that waiver? Is it planning board?
It's the permit granting authority would.
And who is that?
Well, it depends. It could be the planning board or the zoning board.
So they got to show up. Yeah.
Yeah. So in this application scenario, they would submit something. There's the kind of a local contact person, who sees this, and we would say, okay, given your site and everything, we'll, this is a risk, but it seems like it's okay. Go forward. In other sites, you might say, no, it looks like there's actually wetland. Go, meet with someone first before we're going to consider this a complete application. Or, there are steep slopes. You're missing that. It's a difficult call. Someone might try to push it and say, I want a lot of waivers. And staff would say, well, that can go to a hearing, and then, the board might say no. The board still has the ability to deny a permit, even though we have to do this consolidated permit. Any permit board, any permit could still be denied for reasons of incompleteness or other things. So it's not like we're forced to issue the permit. We just have a time frame to consider it if we think it can be approved. So Angus, to your point, yeah, could it be shorter? Maybe we've combined battery energy storage with solar. So the state has two templates that are however many pages each. Ours is combined. To me, the page length it's not an issue, right? I mean, it is a lot, but the bylaw is pretty thick as it is. And if we think it's helpful, great. If there's ways to shorten it or make things more succinct, I welcome that feedback too. Would it be, someone's gonna have to really know this bylaw to help applicants, right? So the idea would be if a homeowner comes in, if a small time developer, you have to be really clear, okay, here's your path, here's what's happening. And so that's kind of where I wanted to make sure it makes sense, right? Like someone wants to do rooftop solar, do we know where it's going? Someone wants to do agrivoltaics, we know how it's gonna go. If someone wants to do 10 acres versus 40 acres, we know where it's gonna go, what they need to do. Otherwise, if we can't help them, that's an issue. But
Okay, Johanna, and then Fred.
Thanks. I asked a very similar question last week, for what it's worth, and I've been slowly working my way through my hard copy of the bylaw. And, ultimately, I think we need more solar in Amherst, and I think that as written, the bylaw mostly offers clarity about, all right, this kind of solar, very minimal hurdles, this kind of solar, a few more things that we would want to look at. And I think those thresholds are pretty sensible. And then so I have a little bit more reading that I need to do, and then Nate, I'll get you comments. I'm sorry it's taken a while, but then the thing that I haven't kind of proof of concept tested is this idea that having 20 pages of regs would just like scare away renewable energy developers. And so I'd be really interested in hearing the perspectives of someone from, and maybe they were part of the solar bylaw working group and I just missed it, but somebody from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center or somebody from the Massachusetts Solar Energy Industries Association or one of the leading, solar developers, both for rooftop and utility scale solar systems in the regions, and just see what their reactions are to this. Because I think that would help me at least understand whether, are we offering clarity so that we can help unleash rooftop solar and like small scale solar development in Amherst, or does the presence of these regulations just stymie the market? Does that make sense?
No, it does. I'm not sure that that has happened, but it's a nice idea to ground truth it a little bit.
All right, Fred.
Is this working?
Yes, it is.
Wow. I think we're overlooking a larger context here, and that is that uh, we really don't have any choice because the legislature has put this whole new permitting reality in front of us as a mandatory thing. Uh, and we have to respond to that with appropriate regulations. So, because of that context, I don't see any problem with the direction that has been suggested here. I have one little quibble with one little part of it, but essentially it made sense to me as I went through it.
All right, thanks, Fred. Nate.
Yeah, I mean, Fred just reminded me that, before the state had, started looking at changing the regulations and legislation, the town had a solar bylaw working group to update the zoning bylaw, or, wherever it may have been, right, general regulations. Because there had been some, proposed solar, and we realized that our bylaw didn't address things adequately. And so, if the state never came forward, there probably would be some draft of this that would be coming out of, this working group. Maybe it would come out even sooner. And so the town was already kind of thinking about how could we add some clarity, and would be extra pages, but how do we address, solar on steep slopes? How do we address solar around this? Or how do we, address battery systems? And so that was already being considered. And then the state, probably realized where the industry is going and what's happening, and let's try to move it forward. Again, they did it in a way that now, a lot of towns are reacting to it because they actually probably weren't considering it. So then, a lot of communities probably are really working really fast to try to come up with a zoning bylaw, or they're just taking the state's template and just trying to run with it. The town had already spent a lot of time trying to get to a point to have something. So, kudos for Amherst. It's interesting the timing, that it coincided. But like, if, for instance, like I said, I think it's interesting that if the state never moved forward, the town would already have been doing something. Angus, to your point, we thought there needed to be something in place, whether, well, to me, it's both to clarify it and to make it easier to understand how it is permitted.
All right. Any further comments on this topic this evening? All right. Any comments on this clean energy bylaw from many members of the public? All right. Time is 7:18. Is that right? Yep. And we'll move forward. East Amherst Local Historic District. Discussion of the possible benefits and impacts of the East Amherst Historic District. Possible vote with recommendations to Town Council. Nate, I guess you want to introduce this. I know there was a map that Walker had sent that I thought would be useful to show folks with the proposed district and the existing districts.
Is that visible for folks? The map?
Yep.
So, I think some planning board members had asked this to be on the agenda just to discuss kind of what, we have two current districts. The Dickinson was the first one, the North Prospect, Lincoln, Sunset, and now a proposed East Amherst. And, the planning board had been given a presentation during the kind of the preliminary report that staff was in the committee was developing. And then, I think some board members said, could we revisit this and talk about what, kind of what's maybe the impacts or the benefits of a local historic district? The idea would be that this would be going to town council for a vote to be part of a general bylaw. So it's not zoning, it's general bylaw. And it regulates what's visible from a public way. So changes to architecture and structures. It does, again, so it doesn't regulate land uses, but it can shape them, given its ability to deny applications for certain changes. So, what's proposed is, this district here in blue. I don't have any more than that. I don't know if, Angus or anyone else wants to speak to the topic. Again, my idea would be to, capture this discussion. It could be in a memo to town council and others, what the board discussed. If there's a motion or something that the board feels pretty strongly about, we can, also relay that.
All right, thank you, Nate. Jesse, and then Angus, and then Jara.
Thanks. I was already thinking about this, and then there was a comment, which I think we all received from the public forum. I think it was from Jason Dorney.
Yep.
Really pointing out that this would restrict development. And so I guess it's a question I have, which is do we have evidence that the formation of the other historic districts have actually dampened development or just augmented? Like, I'm aware of a couple of projects that went to the local historic commission and didn't progress from there. But I'm just wondering, Nate, if you have a sense, like the North Prospect Lincoln, has it changed the development that's happened since that's been put in place, which has been what, 8-10 years, something like that?
Nate?
Yeah, I think I can think of maybe like 2 projects that didn't advance. And they were never actually official applications. It was, owners kind of prospecting, pulling in North Prospect. But, there was some literature reference, and there was another article on the Current, but, it was a 10-year-old article. And so staff had done a little research when we were forming the first one, and, we actually couldn't find any substantial literature on the dampening of development. And then there was also some about property values, and what we could find was at least they were stabilized, not reduced. Some of it would be also, I think it's really different how communities, say, advertise or interact with their local historic districts, and how staff and others work with property owners or developers. And so, I think there's probably a lot of answers. In some places, it might actually deter development. And maybe that's actually what they want to do with it. In others, I think in Amherst, we're not so strict with it that, what we've heard is someone's like, oh, this is insurmountable. So, we have people coming in still looking to, build ADUs in the local historic districts. We have people asking, how much more they could redevelop a property. And it's really then the zoning that is, as much of a, say, if you want to call it a barrier as a local historic district. So, I think there's a lot of factors at play, not just the local historic district.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's my sense too. Thank you.
Angus?
Yeah. So yeah, I'd asked for this to be brought back before the board for us to kind of further talk about. I guess I wanted to start off by saying I think that the work that the Historic Commission and the consultant that they hired did to kind of chart the historic properties in this area is really impressive. And that presentation that they gave us, that I think they've shown other people, they've put up on the website, is really incredible work. And I've only lived in Amherst for a few years, and so it's been fun to learn both about the historic properties in that area, and also through being on like the CPAC to learn about the like crazy mills that used to be all along the river that one of the petitioners was asking for funding to kind of continue researching. So it's just been fun to, as a historian, to learn a lot more about the history of this area. I would, however, like to voice some skepticism about this historic district, and that I am concerned the paperwork from the Historic Commission and from the consultant said that it's not about freezing development, it's not about limiting development, it's just about shaping it. And I think there's some truth to that. At the same time, what these historic districts tend to do is create more hurdles. for development. I mean, that by their very definition, that is what they're doing. And that's fine. If the town council wants to move forward with that, I think that's fine. But I think it's important for the planning board to be kind of clear-eyed that the area that's proposed here is an area that is potentially ripe for redevelopment. It's along two major thoroughfares. It's incredibly well serviced by PVTA. It's near a brand new elementary school that's being built. And it borders the commercial zone that we're commissioning a study to re-examine for possible redevelopment. And it's one of the only commercial zones in the entire town. So while I see that there's a number of properties that are very much worth preserving in this area, there's also a number of properties that are not worth preserving. For instance, there is a 4-building apartment complex that's part of this historic district that is going to be considered a historic building as a result of this historic district being created. I asked when they brought the presentation to us that why that's included, and basically it's because there's another house on the other side of it, and they didn't want to make a non-contiguous historic district. I get that. I understand that. At the same time, I found the lack of any changes to the actual geographic boundaries of the district disappointing. And I'm just concerned that we're not being clear about what we're trying to do in different parts of the town to increase housing for people, and to change uses and imagine a kind of a different future that follows both a master plan and a housing production plan. So I'll stop there. I can share other thoughts, but that's kind of what I'm feeling about this historic district and why I wanted to talk about it more.
Jara, Nate, I think you could stop the share. Okay, Jara.
Thank you, Doug. I want to echo everything that Angus said from the value that this study produced and the intrigue in reading it. I'm not a history major, although I have a bone to pick with Wheaton College about that because I took 8 courses in history, but I'm going to leave that for another time. I appreciate the value of historic districts, but to Angus's point, this does in its very nature limit or slow down or disincentivize development on these properties. And so even if perhaps we've only seen 1 or 2 properties in the existing historic districts come across some problems or be denied, or they were just, fishing or whatever, the very nature of its existence is a disincentive for anybody interested in redeveloping that property into something different, into something that is something other than their primary purpose being preserving that property. And as Angus pointed out, there are a variety of properties in that district that I don't feel are worthy of that level of protection and should not be disincentivized for future redevelopment. Mission-driven developers are not going to look in historic districts to build affordable housing because it's going to take longer, which costs them money. It's riskier to do because they don't know if they're going to be asked to to incorporate this more expensive mortar or trim or whatever the case may be. So we're effectively turning off any opportunity for any kind of affordable housing for any of the teachers that are living or might be working in that school right next door. So I appreciate the value of these. I think this particular tool is a bit too blunt and maybe an overreaction to something that happened a couple of years ago. I think there are a variety of site-specific preservation strategies that could be equally as effective without blanketing this particular neighborhood, especially when it was something like, Angus, correct me if I'm wrong, it was like 8 properties out of the 122 that said that they would like this, and there were certainly comments opposing it as well. So it feels like overkill. I do not want to see, Shays Rebellion's Tavern get demolished by any means. But I also have faith that there'd probably be a pretty strong grassroots organization to save it if that were the case. Regardless, I think there are a variety of different site-specific, property-specific strategies that the town has not investigated yet, perhaps that could be significantly more effective at preserving those properties without deterring the redevelopment that I think some of those properties would really benefit from seeing. So I plan on, I would love to hear everybody's thoughts here, but I'm planning on proposing a motion that we recommend that town council reject the historic district and instead instruct town staff to investigate site-specific preservation methods for historically significant properties in that area.
All right, Tara, why don't you hold that that motion for the moment? I will say, in terms of my opinions, I had asked for the drawing that Nate shared a few minutes ago, just because I was concerned that we were starting to have a sort of disproportionate fraction of our downtown area within a historic district. And, you know, if everybody could agree that 25% of the downtown should be preserved, then we could talk about, well, what 25% really makes, you know, is the most important. And I'm not sure it's the zones we've got. You know, I would probably agree with the Dickinson zone, but the other ones, you know, maybe not. Maybe the buildings that front the town, the North Common. So anyway, you know, I have concerns about dampening development. As Nate said, the zoning is currently a pretty effective impediment, let's say, to a lot of drastic change to the development in that area. So if we wanted to sort of call the question, we could recommend a pretty significant zoning change in that area and see, you know, how did the Historic Commission deal with that? And that might be worth thinking about. You know, then they'd have to decide which buildings are really critical and which, you know, which buildings are not really critical and could go away if the zoning allowed something else to happen. So that's a couple of thoughts from me. I know we have a member of the public who'd like to make a comment, so I'm going to call on Jennifer Taub. Pam, would you bring her over, and we'll give her 3 minutes. And Jennifer, please let us know if you're speaking as a private citizen or as a town councilor.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I'm Jennifer Taub. I live at 259 Lincoln Avenue, and I am speaking as a resident, not in my role as a counselor, and I'm speaking as a resident who lives in the North Prospect Lincoln Sunset Local Historic District. And I can say with no reservations that in no way has this local historic district prevented development from happening really at all. I think in the precinct that I live in, which is the local historic district, there's probably been more new development here than in any other residential district or area in town. We have ADUs are being, you know, built all the time. There's probably more ADU development in the North Prospect Lincoln Sunset Historic District than maybe any other neighborhood in town. And in terms of a single neighborhood, the Sunset Fearing apartment complex was built. They did have to come before the local historic district commission, who was very supportive of the project. And, you know, when it didn't deter, it hasn't deterred development in any way in this local historic district. There are developers wanting to build here all the time. And yes, if you drive over to Sunset and Fearing, you know, you'll see that development, and it looks like it belongs in the neighborhood, but it includes affordable housing. And the developer, Barry Roberts, was more than happy to work with the local historic district commission. There really is that in the proposed East Amherst Local Historic District, it's really only 50 properties. And for those individual properties like the Shays Rebellion Tavern, the Jewish Community Center, which was the second congregational church in Amherst, there's really no other mechanism for ensuring that those very historic buildings don't come down. The most the Historical Commission can do is give a 1-year delay, but they cannot ensure that very historic buildings will remain intact. And the local historic district, and they do this all the time, the commission will, there's been, like when I was on the commission before I was on the council, and people came and wanted to take down garages that were historic or parts of, their houses if they were adding on to them. And if they were not historically significant, which many outer buildings aren't, the local historic district commission can, approve a demolition. So it's really, I have not seen, and it has not been the case in Amherst and again in the North Prospect Lincoln Sunset Local Historic District, which has 200 properties, way larger than what's being proposed in East Amherst, and it has not dampened new development in any way. And I might also add that like the East Street School, which is in the proposed East Amherst LHD area, that is Wayfinders. Sorry, I just want to say Wayfinders is currently trying to get funding to turn that into affordable housing, and they were going to keep the original building and add on to it. So again, that it doesn't in any way impede development. In fact, it encourages it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right. So, Fred, you'll need to unmute.
Yep.
We hear you.
Yeah. I'm reminded of the Joni Mitchell song, "You Don't Know What You Got Till It's Gone." And I've had my position on historic districts evolve considerably over the years. 20 odd years ago, I thought that they were probably more bother than and didn't accomplish much. And I think Jennifer summarized the situation quite correctly. I will strongly support the East Amherst district, and it will not be a major impediment to development. The historical record over the last decade or so, I think, pretty conclusively demonstrates that, and we will end up preserving some buildings that may not otherwise be preserved. And again, once they're gone, they're gone. So I will support it.
All right, thanks, Fred. Johanna.
This is my village center. Like I live a mile from here and I bike by here, twice a week and coach frisbee on the playing fields in this neighborhood. So I keep feeling like right now, at least, it feels like dilapidated and haphazard and kind of junky. Like it's mostly student housing. I just keep thinking, so it doesn't, and then I know there's a project that went through the planning board process to redevelop part of like maybe a quarter of the frontage kind of on the common near where
the
Route 9 and Main Street come together.
The Wayfinders project that included the school, I believe.
That's right. So one question is just like, what's the status with that? Because, and then I do keep feeling like the school itself actually has a very modern feel to it. Like, from the solar panels in the parking lot to the kind of, it's like modern colors.
The new school.
What's that?
You mean the new school?
The new Amethyst Brook Elementary School. It feels very contemporary. It feels very modern. And so it feels strange to me to lock the surrounding neighborhood into historic design standards when we just put in place a very contemporary building that's going to be there for, knock on wood, serving our community for 50 years. So, there are a couple of really amazing buildings, like that Shays Tavern building. It's stunning, right? The original woodwork. I don't know if anybody else has ever been inside, but it is really a lovely building. Um, and right now there are a bunch of local businesses that operate out of there. I don't know, like in order to save that one building, do we have to like enshrine the whole neighborhood into a historic district? I have a hard time believing that's true, but it's not my area of expertise. Um, so I'd say I'm like a little bit ambivalent on this, leaning more in the direction of feeling like I would be inclined to support something like the proposal that was it Jera put forward that we
Jared's
don't
told us
recommend.
he's going to put forward.
Okay, that he's so that's where I'm
We're working our way around to that.
okay. Anyway,
All right.
that's kind of where I am right now.
All right, Jesse.
Thanks. I guess I wanted staff input on that idea of site-specific protection versus a district. Do we have any of that? Like, what's the process on having that happen? Is that, a thing we might do easily?
I mean, Cambridge and some communities have, individual properties on a historic as listed as a, historic district, which, in some cases, like, great, you preserve that one thing, but you lose its context if everything else changes around it. So, a district is just that, right? It's a contextual tool, and we think that there's a reason why, say, East Amherst, why the boundaries were chosen, given the
Right.
period of significance and time of construction and all those things, why this is a cohesive district. There probably are some tools individually. They're probably a little more difficult to manage. There wasn't a great response on the survey, in part because a lot of these properties are non-owner occupied and not, homeowner lived in. What's nice about a district is, some people could say what's not nice, or what's nice about it is that it's a municipal form of government vote. Individual properties, you could have the individual property owner not agree to something. It could be a little trickier. In the past, when I worked with the Historical Commission, we wanted to get a few properties individually listed, just honorary designation, and a few property owners thought this was great until we started saying, well, we'd like to get pictures of the interior, we need that. And then they get, so it happened twice that the property owner was like, no, we don't want to move forward. It just seems really strange. Even though we met with them for a long time and tried to explain, these pictures are for application, they're not going to be used. And for other reasons, they just, when you say, oh, well, this one property, like there's a few listed in town, like Ithmar Conkey House on Main Street, and people get really, they find that to be really odd, right? Oh my gosh, what does that mean? And so, a district is a little different. We could try to pursue that. I would say, to me, there's a lot of, a number of older homes there that if, to have, say, 8 homes try to be 8 properties be individually protected, someone could say, well, why not just do a district? It seems odd to have this kind of scatter shot. Within a district, though, even if you have non-contributing structures or whatever they may call them, the reason why you have them in a district is so if they change, again, it's the context, you don't want to have, these, significant homes, and then in the middle have something that's not regulated, and all of a sudden you have, something much different.
Yeah, sorry, let me clarify my question. In terms of making those 8, 12 places
Right.
protected, is it any different than this process of a district? Is it any more difficult? Or
I'd be curious to hear what Jara would say is the right, what would be the tool, because what I'm thinking of is not any less, it's just as much work. It's just, the outcome would be different in terms of how it's used or how people view it.
Yeah, I guess the other comment I was going to make, and I agree with Johanna's thought about it, doesn't feel particularly well upkept. And so making a historic district doesn't change that either, right? So it kind of just locks it in as it is. And if they continue to be student rentals, frankly, they'll continue to be dilapidated. So anyway, thanks.
All right, Angus.
Yeah, I was just going to say 2 things. One is just that the that area I think is in need of change, not in need of keeping as is. So that's one core element. I understand that the historic district process doesn't necessarily freeze things. But if we're imagining greater zoning changes to the area, and again, I think it's a ripe area, then I don't see that as the changes we'd be making with zoning as consistent with making this a local historic district. I'll just also add, I think there's a lot of great old properties in that area. There's also a lot of properties that are not very old. So to me, the other challenge that I run into in that area is that there's not a clear, to me, historical um, character to the neighborhood. There are properties from the 1750s. There's a whole slew of properties from the mid 1800s, and then there are ranch style homes from the 1960s and apartment complexes from the mid 1900s. So to me, it's not a super coherent historical area in the way that the other two districts seem to have a greater chronological coherence, even with differences in styles across time. And then the final thing I'll just say is that I like the idea of JERA's proposal for site-specific preservation tools. I'd love to hear more about that. And I also think that we should be inviting the town council to think about employing more of those tools beyond the local historic districts, which I think is the other thing. Like historic preservation shouldn't just be happening in these districts, and inviting the council to think in expansive ways about alternatives that are more geared towards specific properties that are under threat is preferable than this kind of broad brush.
All right. I'm being reminded of Paul Revere's house in the north end of Boston, which, you know, the house is preserved. It's probably close to what it looked like 250 years ago, but the context has completely changed. And that's, I think, what a district is intended to prevent, that you end up with just these individual structures that are in a context completely alien to what it was like when they were built. So although I was a little bit tongue-in-cheek about, well, what if we change the zoning and how would the historic district react? I mean, I think, first of all, I'd be surprised if town council agreed to change the zoning, because they've already agreed that this is a historic district whose character as an environment for those structures should not change very much. And so I think if this historic district goes forward, regardless, I just don't think the area will change very much. And right now, the value of those properties seems to be such that it's going to remain student housing. Okay, Jera, I think we're ready to hear, I think, again, about your ideas for other ways to preserve. I remember you going through some before.
Yes. Well, so I want to preface, I am not a historic preservationist, and this is from like an evening or two of research. So there are definitely much more well-qualified people than myself. But the point is that I spent an evening looking at alternative site-specific strategies that didn't instead blanket the entire district, because I just have to underscore the lack of congruity between the homes from 1750s to 1960s, because then it's like, which era are you conforming to architecturally? It feels it doesn't feel like we're preserving a particular era or a particular style. So but I do believe in the value of preserving specific properties. We're also not downtown. I hear you, Doug, but we're not, downtown Boston or whatever, or wherever Paul Revere's house is, right? We're Amherst. But there's a couple things that I found that we could pursue as a town. I'm not going to include these as like we as a planning board should recommend the town pursue them, but I just want to, for example, give some examples of other ways to do it. So number one, we could extend the demolition bylaw from 12 months to 18 months or 24 months. There's already 14 different towns in Massachusetts that have done that. So that would give advocates more time to pool resources and purchase the home on their own, or lobby the property owner to not demolish the property, or whatever the case may be. If the town had a 2-year demolition, bylaw, that could heavily disincentivize any kind of significant renovation to historically significant properties. We could also create our own landmark program. So I don't know a ton about this, but the Massachusetts has set up a preservation restriction agreement where essentially you can put a set of preservation easements on a specific property. I wrote a memo that I sent to town staff. I'd be happy to share with the rest of the planning board. I just didn't know how to do that appropriately for public notice and public visibility purposes. But it's kind of a combination of New Bedford has this historic marker program that like designates specific homes or properties as a significant property for that town of New Bedford. And then as Nate alluded to, there's in Cambridge, there are preservation easements on specific properties. And so if Amherst wanted to create a landmark program where it chooses where to designate these properties and can then get the property owners to voluntarily participate in this preservation easement program, that's one way to preserve those properties. It's a little complicated, maybe, but like it saves putting the burden on all of the properties to be in a historic district, and instead puts that on the one specific historically significant property that we're trying to preserve. There also are, the state just created something called a Small Property State Acquisition Fund as a part of the Affordable Homes Act that can be used to buy, that towns can tap into, that can literally buy these specific properties. They would probably have to be used for some kind of mission-driven purpose, like affordable housing or something, though I don't know that to be the case. But regardless, there's a resource that is now available by the state to acquire small properties that towns can tap into, called the Small Property State Acquisition Fund. There are also preservation purchase pools, which can be either a town-funded trust fund, which is essentially, like an acquisition fund that the town uses to acquire historically significant properties, or there are just grassroots community acquisition pools that do this kind of thing. And then the last idea that I had is there is a something known as right of first refusal, where essentially usually a municipality or some kind of public agency has the right to match essentially the offer, or to create a fair market offer for a property before it goes to the private market. And so if we perhaps did like a landmark program and then applied a right of first refusal to those landmark properties, that would perhaps give, the town, the Amherst Community Land Trust, whoever, the opportunity to match or whatever the case may be, match the fair market value of this property, rather than letting it go to the sharks of the private market. So I just want to underscore, I want to preserve these properties. I don't want like there to be, this to be some crazy discontiguous neighborhood, but I just feel like this is taking a machete to something when we really have a scalpel available to us, and we should be using that. I guess so. With that, I will motion.
Yeah, go ahead and make your motion.
Yeah, I will motion that we as a planning board recommend that town council deny the recommendation to establish a district and instead pursue site-specific opportunities for preservation instead.
All right, Angus?
Second.
Thank you. Members, further conversation, or do you want to go right to a vote? I'm not pushing either way. I don't see any hands raised. I know we're coming up to 8 o'clock when we usually do our break, but hopefully you can hold out a couple minutes more. Okay, so not seeing any hands. I guess we'll go through a vote. Starting, I think we'll start with last name at the end of the alphabet. That means we'll start with you, Jara. Are you in
Aye.
favor of your motion?
I'm in favor. Aye.
All right, and Johanna,
Aye.
Jesse,
Aye.
Angus,
Aye.
Fred,
No.
and I'm an aye as well. That's 5 in favor, 1 opposed. The motion carries. Nate, do you think you can use this motion and tonight's discussion to generate a memo? Or somebody on staff might do that?
Sure, I'll have AI do it, but it sounds good.
All right, well, I'm happy to review it.
No, yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, we'll have Doug review it. And yeah, I don't know when it's going to council, but we can have this ready.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. So, Nate, why don't we move up the staff report to now and just have that staff report before we break?
Sure. Thanks, everyone. I sent an email to the board, thanking you for your time and effort to work with Amherst. As you may know, I'm leaving to become the town administrator in Hadley. So this may be my last planning board meeting. It's been something that's been ongoing, the discussions and finally a contract in place. So yeah, I have a few more weeks left with the town. Staff is working on a transition plan to have coverage with the planning board. Yeah, I don't have, a lot to say. I really enjoyed my time working with everyone here and with the planning board in general the last so many years. I think you guys are doing great things. Keep it up. Have these good discussions. I think it's great to have time to plan and be proactive. And so, it's not always the case, right? There's times in the last so many years where it's been really busy with permitting or other things. And so I think there's been some great discussions and ideas, and just, I'd say keep working on that. I'd like to stay in touch and keep watching what's happening because, we can, as I told Hadley, we can learn from our neighbors. And so I'd like to, reach out across town lines once in a while. I think that's a good thing, especially regarding housing. So thanks.
Well, thank you, Nate. It's been nice working with you too. And I wish you the best in your new position. Angus and then Jara.
Yeah, I was just gonna say thanks, Nate. And Nate, you can still join us on Wednesday nights, even in your new position, right?
The select board meets Wednesday evening, so I've been juggling. I've been going to select board meetings, I think the last 5 Wednesdays, and also coming here. It's been busy.
Jara?
Well, then I want to say congratulations again and sorry for jumping ahead of the agenda. Nate, congratulations. This is so deserved. We are really going to miss you. I just want to throw out there, I don't think it would be crazy for Hadley's planning board and Amherst's planning board to talk to each other. Housing markets do not start and end at municipal boundaries. And so any kind of intermunicipal coordination, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah, no, thanks, Joe. Yeah, I was actually just speaking with someone today about that. We had our 2015 market study, and RKG consultant said, really, the housing market in Amherst is, say what people are willing to commute to UMass and Amherst, and say it's like 45 minutes north, south, east, and west. So, it's like Coleraine to Palmer to whatever. And we never actually really, I think the town tried, but never really reached out to those, those other communities. PVPC has a regional housing committee that we used to meet monthly, but, there's not representatives from every community. I think it is something that we could be a little more proactive on and have some great ideas shared. So thanks for that comment.
All right.
I don't know if I have anything else for a staff report. Pam, do you have anything at this time if we want to just add to it?
No, not at this time. I will say, we do have somebody here to do an ANR. And I don't know if you want to squeeze that in before the break or if you want to take that out of order as soon as we come back from the break. I don't know if Mark from Kestrel plans
Yeah.
to talk, but I'm just trying to be mindful of what Jesse suggested a meeting or two ago, about people's
time.
attending.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I'm happy to go ahead and do the A&R if everybody's agreeable. Okay, I'm seeing heads nod. So
Are you okay, Nate?
Oh, yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
Well, there was information on the online packet. I'll just say, you know, it's, I think it was 107 Henry Street.
mhm.
Yeah. Mm.
So you'll need to bring Mark over when you're.
Can you see my screen? I'm not sharing
I can
from.
see your navigation,
You see your Windows Explorer,
your
Pam.
Windows
So,
Explorer. Yeah.
Okay. Amherst.
do you want me to share my screen, Pam, or I
I
don't know?
do. I thought I had it all set up. I don't know what happened. That would be awesome if you would, and I'll work on bringing Mark over.
You'll need to stop your share, I think.
There you go.
All right, neat.
Sure. The property in question is here outlined in yellow, so it's at the corner of Pine Street and Henry Street. It's actually a pretty old house, talking about older homes. And the idea is to create two properties out of this one property. And the Kestrel Land Trust would be acquiring it. So for some reason, this is now turned sideways with Henry Street on the top, but what it's showing is the existing house and house lot is made smaller, and then there's a few acres with a new lot. So essentially, you're creating two lots out of one. The town engineers looked at it, fire department, there's been transmittals, there's no questions or concerns or comments about it.
Is this near where the salamanders cross?
Yeah, it's exactly
Yeah.
where it is. So, the 2.3 acres will become conservation land or be under a conservation restriction. And then this remains a private house lot.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Jara?
I'm just curious, does Kestrel Land Trust ever buy properties? Because like that's exactly what I'm talking about in terms of like a pooled acquisition.
Sure.
Historic
so
preservation.
Mark's here.
Yeah.
So Kestrel's focused on conservation. I mean, the town over the years has talked
Right.
about doing like a housing conservation deal, but they wouldn't necessarily, buy a property for historic preservation. Maybe they might know partners, but they're interested in land conservation. I don't want to speak for Kestrel, but that's typically what my understanding. Okay.
I figured. I just wasn't. Some organizations do both, and so I wasn't sure. But yeah, thank you.
Well, Jara, like the trustees of reservations, they own houses and they own land.
Yeah.
And they own properties all the way all across the Commonwealth.
Yeah. And
some of them are historic houses, and some of it's conservation land, basically.
Yeah.
So I think the question before the board is whether you have any objection to my signing, probably looks like in the upper right-hand corner of this sheet, on behalf of the board to agree that a subdivision plan is not required for this kind of subdivision of land. It has frontage. It doesn't look to me like you'd need a subdivision to access either parcel. So I'm going to ask if anybody objects, please raise your hand. All right. Not seeing that. Mark, is there anything you want to say before we move on? And I'll just get with Pam and sign this on behalf of the board.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes. Number one, just it's nice to meet you all. I don't think I've ever come before the planning board in Amherst before. You're absolutely right. This is the iconic Salamander, Henry Street Salamander crossing with some structures maintained by the Hitchcock Center. The landowners approached us to donate this land to us at the end of last year, and just given its importance to the town, we were happy to take it on and move it forward. But yeah, no, there's really not much to add. I'm sure the landowners, would thank you for this. I will add just for the previous question. I mean, we do occasionally buy properties. Actually, we buy properties quite a bit. They're usually for conservation, but we have now done several combined housing and conservation projects, including one in Pelham and one in East Hampton, are both fairly major projects. So would be happy to talk to the board in the future about that. Getting a bit off topic, I know.
Well, thank you.
Expect
All
an
right,
email, Mark.
Jesse.
Just
I'm sorry,
wondering,
Tara.
since Mark's here, just wondering if you're going to add salamander viewing stations now that if we're going to own it.
What was that at Salamander Viewing Station?
Yeah.
I think they only come out once in a while, and
Yeah,
the community does a really great
it's very
job.
well celebrated. I mean, there should be a place to go watch.
I will say, actually, honestly, though, there was one correction. We will be taking this on as a donation of conservation land. There will not be a formal conservation restriction on the property. And there was talk about eventually, potentially, combining it with town conservation land, which it is adjacent to. So we would be open to that, but we're also open to holding it in perpetuity as well, whatever makes sense to the town. But I look forward to getting out there for Big Night next year and helping out.
Yeah, I know Hitchcock Center really tries to make a big deal out of it and get everybody out there to help guide the salamanders. Okay, I will, my interpretation of the board is that it's okay for us to sign this and move on. All right, so the time is 8:06. Mark, thank you very much. I think
Thank you all.
you can get back to your regularly scheduled programming tonight.
Will do. I appreciate you taking me forward here to this. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the time is 8:06. Why don't we take 5 minutes and come back around 8:10, 8:11, certainly by 8:15. right, I see a couple of members back. Please turn on your cameras when you return. Looks like we still need Fred.
Do we have to wait for Fred, or can we get started without him? Or would you like to wait for Fred?
Yeah, I think I'd answer that I'd like to wait for Fred if we can. Give him a couple minutes more. Nate, I was wondering whether we ought to go to old business so that we could talk about the mixed use building zoning before we go into the general housing discussion.
I mean, I was hoping that this meeting was going to go to 11 as maybe one of my last ones. So I don't really, the order is, sorry. I mean, either way, old business we had is an open space as well too.
Yeah.
Um,
All right. Well, we'll just stick
Either
with
way,
the current,
I
we'll
think-
stick with the current order.
yeah, current order is okay. There's a lot on this agenda.
Mhm.
Right. Why don't we go ahead? And then we'll just try to note when Fred returns.
Mhm.
All right. General housing discussion. I think before we start the potential zoning amendments for the PRP discussion, I wanted to say that with Nate's departure, there's going to be less town staff to support zoning amendments, frankly, and the processes that have to happen within some statutory time periods to move them along. And so, frankly, I had a meeting with Jeff and Pam last week about that, and mostly about that. And they are interested in, particularly given that there's the clean energy bylaw, and there's downtown design standards. We've got some big things already on our plate. There's some interest in us essentially slowing our recommendations for recommending things to town council, and partly because of staffing with the town staff, and also town council has some significant things on their agenda. So as we talk about the PRP, I think my hope is that we can bring it to a point where we're kind of happy with it, but then let it sit for a little while before we formally recommend it to town council. So I'll stop there. And Jesse, I see your hand is up.
Thanks. I was going to raise this later, I guess, with the report of the subcommittee. But yeah, I was wondering how it's going to play out. I'm very happy for you, Nate. We will miss you sorely, certainly. I definitely do not want to add more to staff plates than they can handle, already strapped. At the same time, I'm very disappointed if that's the approach we need to take. I think most of us, maybe not, if not all of us, are on planning board because we see a real need to make changes. And I have to say it out loud. It's a huge mistake to tell planning board to stop planning. A huge mistake. Who else is going to do it? I'm not saying we've accomplished that much in the 3 years I've been on here, but we're trying. And if we're told to stop and back off, it's just not going to happen. And I think it's a very important thing for our town to keep pursuing. Whether my ideas are right or wrong, whether someone else has the right idea, we can't back off. So if we're voting, I would say, no, I'm not going to vote to slow things down.
Okay, that's fine.
That's all I got.
Nate, you can say whatever you want tonight, I guess.
Yeah, no, we worked hard to get the priority lists and to try to focus the board and staff, and I would still say to work on that. So kind of echoing Doug's last point is that, still advance the idea of housing in the PRP. It's the subcommittee discussed it. I had, staff had proposed an overlay. Angus said, could we do it without an overlay? And so then now, we've worked on how it could be incorporated within, say, base zoning, and it's a lot of factors. So like Doug said, keep working on that. I would still say, keep working on if it's, small lot subdivisions, or is it just changing lot sizes town-wide? And so, staff is still working on a few other zoning amendments that I thought could be brought forward this year, which maybe will be tabled, but still advance them so that when they're ready, they're ready. So yeah, I agree, Jesse. I think, staff is really trying to find someone to replace me and work in my position and help the board and, complement the whole planning department. And I think that, they'll be successful. And so, yeah, I would like to, encourage the planning board and subcommittee to keep doing that. What I was going to say is maybe the subcommittee, the planning board seems like there's time on the agenda. Maybe the subcommittee doesn't meet for a month or two and meets during the planning board time, but we try to allocate, time at the full board to discuss what we're going to do now, some housing topics, because I think that's really important. There's
I will say that some of the burden is just having the separate subcommittee meeting to do the advertisements, to schedule the meeting, and I guess they're not producing the minutes, but there is some time there.
Right. I think Doug said too, there's also potentially other, whether it's zoning amendments or other things happening. East Amherst, we're really hoping to get that going and have the board be the venue with a consultant. I think will be a really important thing happening this year. So, the board will be busy. Like I said, keep the ideas moving, and you can always, Jared, to your point, yeah, you can send stuff to staff and we can disseminate it to the full board. So that way there's no issue with open meeting law violations. So even informational thing can be shared board member to board member. If you see an article, as long as there's no response to it. And so the concern always is like, oh, Jared, you see a nice article, you send it to everyone, and all of a sudden someone's like, oh, this and this, and all of a sudden there's a conversation that should be happening in open meeting because they're talking substantively about part of it, but sharing information can still happen. And so, usually we caution against it, but, again, like the 40Y idea or small lots, if someone sees a great article about why small lot zoning is beneficial, You can send it to staff, we can send it out, or you can send it along and just say, please don't reply all. So I think there's a lot of good information out there. And I think, yeah, I think especially with, I don't know, I feel like in the last year or two, especially with the planning board and the town, right, I think there's been some really good ideas and people are more willing to have conversations that say maybe 15 years ago we weren't having in terms of changing zoning or things. I think that's great.
All right, so I have 3 hands up for Jara, then Jesse. Actually, just Jara and Jesse.
Thank you. I wanted to say that Doug and Jesse, you are both right. And I really appreciate both of the points that you guys brought up, because Doug, I cannot tell you how many times I work with municipalities that propose lots of great ideas and new policies and new regs and new things that there just literally is not the staff capacity to functionally administer and do. So like, I really appreciate you pointing out the fact that yes, we're going to be missing, you know, the town's going to be missing a significant capacity in Nate's absence. But Jesse, I mean, I hope you saw my little clap, because I just loved the urgency in your voice. And so I think that there is a way, you know, it's not ideal, but there are ways to split the difference. Like, we can take on more responsibility. We as a planning board are not limited to any particular amount of time that we spend outside of these meetings other than our own, you know, obligations. But so like, that is one thing, is that we can commit to spend a little bit more time working outside of planning board meetings on particular topics. We can also, you know, look at our networks to find expertise. Like, I have a lot of friends who are much more steeped in zoning bylaws than I am on a day-to-day basis, who I could ask to get some help, you know, getting our ideas into actual language. There's technical assistance opportunities. Like, I don't know, Massachusetts Housing Partnership, there might be a technical assistance opportunity where they are able to send somebody here to help us and fill that capacity gap so that we can actually continue to do things. So you're both right. I love so much both of the points that you both brought up. And I think there's ways for us to not be left totally in the lurch in Nate's absence.
Well, we won't be totally in the lurch. I think they are looking at assigning one of the current staff planners to support us, but everybody's going to be a little bit stretched.
Yeah.
All right, Jesse.
Thanks. Yeah, I was gonna again bring this up later, but since it came up already, I would also vote to maybe suspend the subcommittee until staff feels like they have bandwidth for that time.
And we're happy to put zoning discussion on the agenda.
I think that's a very good move until
try
staff
to,
says,
you know,
so there's someone else in
allocate-
place and we can actually have the appropriate support.
Yeah, you might have to bring a couple of us up to speed with what you've been talking about.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, Angus.
Yeah, I was just gonna second what's already been fourth, what's already been said. Just that there's a number of times in the subcommittee meetings where we've asked Nate to do things, and Nate's very good at doing those things, and we won't be able to do that in the same way. And so there's I've tried to take on some PRP things, but it's also slower going if we're doing it in our spare time. And so I think repeatedly made promises to like finish things, and then things have happened with my other job. So anyway, I just think that we'll have to be maybe a little bit more patient with ourselves, and also recognize that when we have an idea and want to execute something, it's just going to take longer.
Okay. I'll also kind of remind everybody, we did get a couple of homework assignments for the downtown design standards and the clean energy bylaws, and they may not be our individual priorities, but they seem to be a pretty major priorities from a town-wide point of view. So, okay, is that kind of the first item, and then we should go right into the report of the Housing and Zoning Subcommittee. Jesse and Angus and
Um, yeah, I missed planning board last time. I don't know if there was discussion then.
there
We
was
haven't met since before then, so there's not a whole lot to report other than I think the PRP, which we're going to talk about. We spent a lot of time on that. And the mixed-use building, we also talked about a lot, which I think is on our agenda as well. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure there's much needed more than that at the moment. Angus, or Fred, please join in, or Nate, if I left something out.
Nate.
Yeah, I was going to say, Pam, does a lot to support me and the board, and she'll be with you. So I think I want to acknowledge her and her work. So it's not, it won't be in the lurch. Yeah, housing in the PRP, I think it's something we talked about, and I think what the subcommittee reason is that, there's different ways to approach it and different ways to allow it. So, one idea was an overlay that, again, it's an overlay. It doesn't change the base zoning, and you can, have standards and conditions that allow certain things. Or what the approach the housing subcommittee took was, allow apartments and mixed-use buildings, but don't change the definition of apartment. So 20 units still stays the cap. We're not trying to tweak mixed-use buildings and come up with something new if some of the standards from other areas can be applied. And so, everything else that happens in the PRP is still allowed, and then we're adding housing to it. And it could be, you add other things. And so, like I said, the PRP, although there are large areas of land, there are a number of constraints on them in terms of wetlands or topography or other things. So the developable land is quite small. So the idea would be to allow multi-unit development. And then, really it's a permit process. The idea to me would be it should be site plan review, because if it's a special permit, no one, too discretionary. And so, what you see in the packet is that to do that, and without having an overlay, you need to change, a little bit, say in Article 2 and 3, and, all these other articles so that they're all consistent. The idea, though, is, say, to allow, different residential uses in the PRP, but, to get there, you have to do all these other things, like maybe change the dimensional standards in the table, change the conditions in the use chart, change something here and here. And so, it looks complicated, but the idea is kind of simple. And I think it's a really good idea. I think one thing to consider is that there's 3 PRP zones in town. There was some discussions about what's happening up in Amherst with the proposed Beacon project. That's PRP. Could this changes affect only the PRP, say, along in East Amherst, along Belchertown Road, Old Belchertown Road, or does it apply everywhere? There's so many different ways to move it forward, but I think it's a good discussion to have. As part of the Regional Housing Committee with PVPC the other week and Valley Community Development Council, a number of communities that PVPC works with are looking at adding housing to, say, like their industrial zones or something similar, because, again, they've been in place for decades and they haven't, been utilized completely, or they have been used, but now there's some potential to have housing and still allow, whether it's industrial or research or professional uses. And so it is something that's gaining traction in other communities. And I think it's something to continue looking at. Once it gets moving, I think, Rob Moore, the building commissioner, and other staff will be important to pull in to say, okay, how does this really work? Are there pieces we're missing or details we don't see? I think the idea is straightforward. I think it's like then the nuts and bolts. Okay, how does it actually work if we have a 20-acre property and someone wants to do this, but also maybe do an office building 2 years later? Like, how does all that work? I think, to me, the bones are there. It's really just kind of, that homework piece of like, okay, thinking through those kind of scenarios, does it all make sense? Yeah, I don't have any great changes. I think, it's almost like you'd have to do almost like concept designs given what Angus has proposed and say, okay, does it all work? Can we do this? Do we want to do more? Do we want to include other types of residential uses? Do we just like these 2 types of uses? And so those are the kind of pieces to it.
All right. Angus, was there work on this proposal that you were planning to do and you haven't been able to get to
Yeah, the status that it was in before, I made a bunch of changes in the documents that I think Nate sent around that
Uh-huh.
are basically it's um, getting rid of Office Park as a separate designation. There are essentially two properties where the Cooley, I think it's where Cooley Dickinson is. They're like outpost off of Route 9. And one other property. The town staff's idea was to move those actually into BL, I think, right, Nate? And they both fall under the University Drive overlay already. So those are the only Office Park properties, and it would open up PRP to a few other things that are currently allowed in Office Park around Office Parks. And then mostly it would be targeting opening up PRP to housing of different varieties. And so what that requires is a bunch of minimal changes kind of all across the zoning bylaw to make sure that anytime Office Park appears, it's deleted, and to change PRP to account for some of the additional uses. And so the most probably the most complicated document is the Excel spreadsheet, which I
Yeah.
think you
Do
all
we want to see these?
I don't know. The Excel spreadsheet is a little confusing because I use track changes in it, and track changes in Excel is not as friendly as track changes in Microsoft Word.
Mm.
Um, but I think it's the use classification, section 3.3. But that's really where I would say the meat of the changes are. So the things that I still need to do, I need to write up a memo explaining the specific changes that are in all of these documents so that people don't have to look in all of the documents. That's kind of minor, but that's probably my next step before we go a ton farther. You can see this red line on Pam's screen is where Office Park is. So that would be essentially eliminating that entire column. And then where PRP is, there's a bunch of recommended changes, moving things from no's to site plan review. But you can't see those unless you go to this track changes feature.
Well, I mean, we're looking at the PDF.
Right. That's what I
We're
have.
not looking at
Oh,
the
I see.
Excel document.
Yeah, yeah. So this is the kind of thing that I need to put in the memo, like what is each box that's been changed in this Excel document so that people don't have to try and figure out how to find it in Excel. So that's one of my to-dos. I think the other to-do is there is a couple of things that Nate the town staff kind of needed to take a look at, because what I was trying to do was make the changes to the overall zoning bylaw that would accord with what Nate was trying to do with an overlay. And he can do a few things more easily in an overlay than we can do in changing the overall bylaw. One of those is parking. The University Drive overlay has separate parking requirements than general zoning. So Nate was trying to recreate that in the PRP. I'm not sure if we can do that in the overall zoning code. That was one question. Design guidelines. The University Drive overlay has some limited design guidelines. That would be harder to do. So these were some of the questions that I think town staff was going to take a look at. So that's kind of where things stand.
All right. So you don't need anything from us tonight.
I don't think so. I mean, I think the main question is getting like the full go ahead from the board that we'd like to pursue. I don't want to do more work on writing up this memo on all of the changes I made to the overall zoning if we would rather do an overlay. So I think my question to the board is, do we want to move forward with trying to make changes to the PRP by simplifying the zoning code, or do we want to add an overlay, which would simply add things to the zoning bylaw?
Well, philosophically, I'd vote for simplifying. You know, it's clear that this change ripples through a lot of the sections. So That's a little bit tedious.
Mostly, yeah, it's mostly semantically. It's not like substantively.
Okay.
So it's just annoying, rather
Yeah.
than like, you know.
All right, Fred?
Yeah, I think the zoning subcommittee pretty much came to a consensus that we'd rather go with a straightforward uh, change to the underlying bylaw rather than have another overlay floating around out there. And there really isn't the kind of justification for it that you see on University Drive, for example. That is a completely legitimate place for an overlay. But no, I think the way to go is to make the bylaw read the way we think it ought to read, and it's really not that complicated.
All right. Nate, what would be the right time to engage Rob Mora if we wanted to talk about the implementation and whether what we've done seems to be workable?
Yeah, I think if Angus, sends the board I think some of it is also our bylaw is, the document is, every section is its own Word document, and then the use chart is an Excel document, and so there's all these different formatting. So actually, just the kind of process of making the changes to the documents is a task in of itself, not just even thinking about how to make those changes. So I would say, like, after the next planning board meeting, if the board, if Angus gets the board some changes, the board talks about them, I think then it's a good time to have Jeff and Rob look at it before it goes too far. And so, to the parking point, and some others, it's like, yeah, you'd go into the section and you can say, I mean, again, it's like one of those things. It's like, in these areas, maybe like, except in the PRP, these
Right.
parking ratios or these commercial things don't apply. Again, it's the ripple effect. So, the way we did on University Drive, you can say that this overlay, supersedes all sections of the bylaw. So, this part of 7 doesn't apply. So then we can do shared parking a little more easily. Right now, the bylaw says to do shared parking, you have to have, 120% of the spaces required and blah, blah, blah. And so it's just kind of trying to, how do you allow shared parking in the PRP between different uses and maybe not try to rewrite all of that shared parking section. And so, I have notes, I just haven't, but I think that's where, Rob could be really helpful. And sometimes it might just be really like a phrase, except in the PRP. So there's a few different ways to do it, but I think calling out those things, if you look at what Angus has proposed, I think it's like 4 floors and 45 feet. So again, kind of what, do we like that new height requirement? Do we like any design kind of standards from the U-Drive overlay or from Dotson and Flinker that we'd want implemented in there? Is there things that we like in terms of, facade treatments or something? So I think what's important with the PRP is that because it's not a lot of available land, you might have, 5 acres here, 3 acres there, 7 acres here. To me, I think it's really multi-unit development because, you don't have you might have a 20-acre property and not much of it could be developed. And so you could have just single family zoning. I don't think that, maybe that's where the board wants to go. To me, I'd say, well, let's try to do multi-unit development. Do you want to throw in townhouses or some minimum density, whatever it is? So I think those are the pieces to look at. Right now, the definitions, don't have those kind of standards. So then they become added to the use chart, maybe as standards and conditions to those kinds of uses. So, the idea for the subcommittee was we're not changing the definition of apartments or mixed-use buildings. We'd be making those changes in the use chart under standards and conditions that would apply in the PRP. So that apartments, are still allowed in these other zoning districts, nothing's changed. We're really then going to have the language for appropriate for the PRP. So, just kind of think about that, what you might want to see. I agree with Fred. I don't think it's complicated. It just, it hits a lot of different pieces of the bylaw.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Angus, for taking the lead on this. All right. So that's our discussion of the PRP zoning. And so time is 8:42. We'll move on to the old business portion of the agenda, starting with the open space and recreation plan. Nate, I assume you want to get a kind of consensus agreement from us on this plan this evening?
Yeah, this plan has been in an update phase for a few years now. So the planning board looked at it in 2024. I think took a vote or agreed by consensus to say the board supported it. And staff continued to work on it. The state updated their guidebook on how to what to have in an open space and recreation plan. So what was sent to you is really a pair. The staff, I can't take credit for it. Walker, Powell, and Aaron Jock really took the plan, which had been growing to almost 200 pages, and synthesized it and made it a lot more succinct and said what's really necessary to meet the state goals and what still captures all the information in the what we have a 2017 version. And so they have a 70-page document which will grow with maps and appendices and other things, but really got to come up with what kind of to me is a reasonable document that gets across the goals and objectives and strategies of the open space and rec plan. So I think we're calling it an update. To me, it's really almost a new plan. The state can approve it for, I think, up to 10 years. And so the idea would be, as part of this review, the planning board is required to take a look at it and say they've reviewed it. Typically, we'd ask for a vote and a letter of support or a letter of review, I think is what the state calls it. If it won't happen tonight, I'd say, at the next meeting, to have the board look at it. Really it's an open space and recreation plan. So there's open space goals related to conservation, there's recreation goals, and then, there's an implementation matrix at the end in terms of, if there's a number of goals, each goal has to have objectives, and then under each objective is a strategy or action step, and then who the responsible party is, and a time frame and a priority. And so that becomes kind of the really important part of the plan, and there's a required action plan map. So the town did do a survey a while ago. We had all this information. It's really just kind of putting it together in this formal plan. Having it in place does allow the town to apply for certain grants. So it is a prerequisite to apply for certain funding opportunities, which the town may want to apply for this summer. So, the Conservation Commission is meeting tonight, and they're also looking at it. I don't think they'll come to a vote on it. I think they might want one more meeting, is what I was told. So, I think the planning board could have that as well. I don't have anything, we've had one in place for since 2009. We had kind of a rough plan before then, but really since 2009, we've had a formalized plan. The goals have been updated a little bit. I'd just take a look at it. If you have big questions, sure, let staff know. If there's, some other questions related to strategies or objectives. Every part of the plan now is a required section from the state. So they have this guidebook, and essentially you can follow it. It's a template, but I think the shortest plan I've seen is 45 pages, and the longest is over 200. So some communities go, they go heavy on the narrative. So I think we're in the middle.
All right. So my recollection is that we did look at this maybe a couple of years ago, and I think we endorsed it. But you want to go through this again, right?
Yeah, I think it's
Okay.
like I said, it's changed enough. I think it would be good to have the board take another look and
Go on record.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Pam, can we make sure that this is on the agenda for the next meeting?
We sure can.
And it sounds like we have a third homework assignment from tonight.
Mhm.
just quickly, if there's priorities, I would say let's try to get I think staff really would like to get the open space and rec plan moving. Not that you do not do your other homework. But if you were my kids, I would say, just given the funding opportunities in the summer and that staff has been working really hard to, kind of complete this, take a look. I say it's short, it is 70 pages. And if you add that to the downtown design standards and the clean energy bylaw, you have a few hundred pages of reading. I laugh because that is a lot.
Yep.
It is a lot, and it's a lot of material. It's a lot. So, I agree with Doug. I think it was like 2 years ago the board looked at it. And I think there were some changes made. Like I said, we're really trying to be succinct and a little more concise in this version. So what the board looked at last time, I think was probably 180 pages, and now it's 70. So sure, things are omitted, but really we try to find where there's redundancy. So we talked about some things in 4 different places, didn't have value added. So staff really said, okay, what is the right section for this to be in the plan? And so there are pages removed without really losing information because it was just streamlined. But if the board has questions, staff's available to answer them.
Okay, great. All right, next item is the mixed-use building zoning amendment. Nate, do you want to introduce this?
Yeah, so the planning board, voted to refer this to town council. And after that fact, Rob Moore and staff looked at it and said, there's a few kind of big issues with it. It wasn't as easy to apply some of the standards from University Drive to mixed-use buildings in the other village centers. And so, coming to you tonight with a strong recommendation to, change that vote to refer it back to the board. So to say, we won't push it to council right now. We're going to vote to bring it back to the board and look at it. So staff is, working on a memo with a few key points that, it could be changed and then referred in the near future, but really consider a few things. Some of it is just also, does the standard from University Drive work, or could it be as simple as a smaller percentage, or, in the standards and conditions and the use chart say, 30%, except in these districts, the permit granting authority may allow as low as 10 or 15%. And so the building commissioner is kind of leaning toward that, because the way it's written now with all these changes, there's questions about what if there's two, what if there's 2 streets, 2 frontages. And then, we started doing the math and looking at RVC properties, and a number of them are small, and given their shape, the 75% to a certain depth actually ends up being more than 30% of the gross floor area. So it actually doesn't do kind of what was intended. I think on larger projects, it does. It actually is less than the 30% of the gross floor area. But on a lot of properties, it would probably be more. And so it's just one of those things where, the smaller percentage might just be more effective. And also, maybe we ask the applicant to justify it a little bit differently than just that proportion. I think on University Drive, the way it worked is that, there's no streets behind it. We asked that all the properties be built out along the frontage along University Drive, and it was pretty clear and easy because it was a linear, area. These RVC properties are not as uniform and consistent in shape and frontage. And so, although I looked at it, I feel a little embarrassed that it, came this far and we have to pull it back. I think it was great that staff looked at it. I think some of it was also too, let's not bring it to council if we think we could make it a little bit better beforehand, because they're going to have a lot of questions, and we want to be able to be pretty clear and say, yeah, we think this works. We've run through a lot of scenarios. I showed the subcommittee a few scenarios, and then staff looked at a few more and realized, okay, it doesn't work. So it's really interesting that you can look at 4 or 5 scenarios and it's great. You look at a few more and it isn't. And so I think we've just, I think staff has been doing that since the referral and wanting to come to the board with that recommendation. And so, we still think it could be, modified and then move forward again, this year. But, just to take a look at it again, one more time before making a referral. So, we want to vote, a motion to vote by the planning board. If not, it would go to council, it'd be referred, council would look at it on Monday, and we're just not sure it's quite ready. And I know, there could be different opinions, like, oh, it'll come back, we can do things. I think really we want to make it as best as we can. And like I said, I think we can do that with another meeting or 2 of the planning board.
All right. So, so I'm going to make a motion just to kind of get it on the floor. And that is, the motion would be, I move that the board agree to retract the recommendation to town council, which it made on March 18th of this year, to refer a zoning amendment for mixed-use building standards in village centers and zoning bylaw table 3 and reconsider this zoning before we again refer it to town council. Does that make sense is that adequate, Nate? And did that make sense to everybody that just heard that long sentence? Okay. Jesse.
I will second that, but I also have questions.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for seconding. Now we can have some discussion. Jesse?
Sure, thanks. Just so that before we vote, this will come back to us with the clear issues you're raising, right, Nate?
Yeah, so yeah, we were going to try to rush to have a memo tonight, and I said I could relay some of the points, but the idea would be to have, even
But I
if
mean,
it's not a
when-
memo, a bullet list of questions or concerns. Yeah.
But when it comes back, there will be this clear guidance about what you think needs to be better.
Yes,
Correct?
it
Okay,
will.
thank you.
All right. Anybody else have any questions about this? Okay. All right. I'm not going to try to prolong the conversation if it doesn't need to. Why don't we go through a vote with a yes vote being agreement to retract? And so, Nate, the urgency tonight is to keep it off of town council agenda on Monday.
Right.
Before it's really ready.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's start with you, Fred.
Aye.
Thank you. Angus.
Aye.
Jesse.
Aye.
Johanna.
Aye.
Jara.
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well. That's 6 in favor, 1 absent. So Nate, you think that this could come back next meeting? You think by that time staff will have like a bulleted list of things that they're concerned about?
Yeah, if not next meeting, the meeting after, I think we can keep it on the agenda. And then, we'd have to gauge with staff where they are. I will say that the clean energy bylaw will come back for a hearing in late May. So I think the first meeting in May actually would be a good time to talk about the mixed use one, knowing that then, there'll be new topics or, other business for the planning board to pick up in May and June.
Well, then the first meeting in May is our next meeting.
It is. So yeah, I don't want to promise for Jeff or Rob, but I think it is likely that they could come back with information.
Okay. All right. So we'll keep that on the agenda for next meeting.
And on my list.
All right. Third item under old business. Did we have any other topics not anticipated? Not seeing anybody indicating that. Angus.
I don't know. Is there going to be a time for us to talk about Hampshire College at all?
Well, we don't have it on the agenda. I guess I've had some conversations with Jeff about the fact that that's likely to prompt some conversations about zoning.
Yeah, I'm not looking to, I guess, to launch into discussions about planning so much as I just wanted to say something about Hampshire.
Okay. Well, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks. So I just wanted to express I think a deep disappointment and sadness about Hampshire's closing. The reason I brought this up in old business is that when we were informed that Archipelago had pulled its plan for the area around Atkins, I raised some concerns about how that could impact Hampshire. And I think it's clear that Hampshire had long-term challenges. The higher education environment over the longer term doesn't look great for institutions like Hampshire. But I can't help but feel that the town, and especially the different committees that were involved in that decision, at some level failed to take into consideration the full scope of what a negative outcome for that sale would mean for Hampshire in the short term for their financial viability. Um, and from my understanding of how Hampshire officials have talked about it, that was one of, apart from fundraising from alumni and other donors and increasing enrollments, that sale was kind of like one of their key ways for short-term financial solvency. So I just wanted to kind of re-register my disappointment that Hampshire didn't show up more often to kind of make their case, but also disappointment in all of the stakeholders across our town in failing to do what we could to help that institution. And it's obviously an enormous loss to our town, to the intellectual vitality of the whole valley. But it's also a huge loss to higher education. They were doing cool work, and it's just a unique place that's going to be whose loss is going to be felt very deeply. So I just wanted to register all of that. It's not, there's nothing we can really do about it at this point, but I hope that in future decisions, we think more holistically about how our planning decisions impact different stakeholders in the community. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Angus. Fred.
Well, thank you, Angus. You took the words out of my mouth. I think the town does have a role here and a role in the outcome. I've known Hampshire College for a long time for personal reasons. Back in the 90s, I was the head electrician at Hampshire, and one of the closest friends of my family was a professor at Hampshire for a very long time. And yeah, I think that the situation that I think could have helped Hampshire stay going, you know, it didn't work out, and I think it should have. I also think that, and this is kind of open-ended, but it seems to me that UMass could extend its reach to there, and you know, you have a functioning campus, and I think that there might be a way to handle that. So, but I think we have to think outside the box here.
All right. Thank you, Fred. Yeah, I think we're all feeling a sense of loss, and you know, it's hard to know. I mean, I think there's multiple parties that probably have some responsibility, and it's a challenging time to be offering that kind of program. Okay, we will probably be coming back to Hampshire at some point in the future, but it seems like there's a lot of moving pieces at the moment, and some of the chips need to fall before that. All right, time is 9:01. We'll move on to new business. Any unanticipated new business, Pam or Nate? Nope.
Nope.
Okay. We've already done the Form A and R subdivision applications. Anything for ZBA applications?
Not from me.
Okay.
No, I think, there's, more applications that'll probably be coming in shortly. And so they can, we can, bring those up at the planning board meetings, but there's nothing right now.
Okay. How about SBP, SPR, SUB applications? Anything on the horizon?
Yeah, there's a few site plan review applications. One is the high school is looking to, it was a class don't know if it was a class project, it was a club project. The idea was to kind of research, I think it was the architectural and maybe design club, architecture and design club. And it was kind of research what are some amenities at school and what was there. Anyways, they determined that a gazebo out in front of the high school would be something that would be used and very nice, right? So it was like there had been some seating, there isn't there now. And when they discussed this in their findings of their survey, the school committee and others said, this is great. Let's keep actually let's actually implement this rather than just say, here's something that would be nice. And so staff has met with them and they would, it'll need a site plan review application, but it's a pretty big gazebo that would be in the front lawn between the walkway and the school. I'm not sure how fast it'll come before the board, but they're working on it. And so I think that, so it'll be something that needs site plan review. There's probably a number of considerations we offered to them, but I think it'll be a great project. But it needs to go through that permitting. So,
Okay.
And there's a few others, which I don't know, there's a few property owners and applicants, maybe potential applicants who, contact the town and then we don't hear from them. And so, if they come forward, there could be 2 or 3 in the next, month, but I don't know at this point. There is a public shade tree hearing that may be coming forward in May on East Pleasant Street. It is a public scenic road. So it's a scenic road, public hearing and shade tree public hearing, a combined hearing with the tree warden. So that might be in May or early June for one tree removal. It's just one tree.
Okay. Planning board committee and liaison reports. Bruce is not here to talk about PVPC. Angus, anything on CPAC? Or have you guys gone quiet until the next round?
Well, the Jones Library saga continues apace. So there's been sort of a legal advisement. There's been historic commission calling into question some of the things that we recommended funding. There's been issues with work that seems to have been already completed that we may have been or was already underway, and CPAC funding is not supposed to be used for, it's only supposed to be used for future projects. So I'd say the Jones Library stuff continues to be sort of a morass with very vocal opposition from some segments of the community and then huge amounts of support from other parts of the community. So I have no idea what the town council is going to recommend, but that's a big chunk of the CPAC funding that we set aside, although not all of what Jones Library requested. Everything else seems like normal, but the report has been presented to the town council. I don't think I've gotten a copy of the final report, so I should probably ask for that and send it around. But Nate, the town council got a copy of that report, right?
Yeah, I believe so, that it was sent to them. So, the CPA then gets voted on as part of the budget. Sometimes it's a separate order by town council, usually earlier, just so they know, they can, solidify that, especially if there's any borrowing or larger capital things. It could be tied to, kind of matches in the other town budget. But yeah, no, the CPA committee, Angus, thank you. It is a lot. So, it's seasonal. It's pretty intense. Doug, you had done it before. And statutorily, the planning board, I don't want to say is obligated, but typically it has a rep on the CPA committee. So the CPA committee is made up of representatives of other boards and committees from town, and then they make these funding decisions. And I think Angus probably has realized that it's become competitive and there's more applications
that came in your upper office.
Fred, I'm going to mute you. Sorry,
yeah,
go
so
ahead.
It's become more competitive and there's more funding being requested than is available. And so the CPA committees, in the last few years, there's a lot of work to really prioritize that and whittle down the funding requests, and they meet frequently. So Angus, thank you for your time. I know it is, it's extra meetings. I also think that they're great projects. So, they're everything from open space to historic preservation, conservation, and recreation. So they're things that to me really benefit the community. And then sometimes those projects come back to the town, whether it's through permitting or other things. So, first step is getting the funding to these organizations and having those projects be implemented. Thanks, Angus.
So Angus, are you thinking you might do this next year, or have you had enough?
We're having a baby in July, and so another baby. So, I'm not going to make any commitments right now. I mean, there was one week, I think, when Nate presented to CPAC, where I had the planning board on Wednesday, a subcommittee meeting Thursday morning, and then a CPAC meeting Thursday night. And so it was like my eighth or ninth hour of meetings that week. So I don't know, but I was told we had 16 proposals, and I've been told that's really a very unusual amount. So lucky me. But and just like way too many funding requests. So maybe it'll be easier next year and it wouldn't be as many meetings. But yeah, I'm not going to make any commitments to that.
I'm not asking for a commitment. I was just asking whether you had already decided, no way.
No, it was great. I mean, it was a really cool process and really neat to hear the proposals and the discussion was really tough. I mean, like there was a lot of alignment around things, but there were, there was so many requests and so many needs, and it became clear over the course of the CPAC meetings that there's just a ton of deferred maintenance that this town has for various reasons kind of put off and is really grappling with in the last few years with the elementary school, with parks, with the public works building, with the town hall, with the Jones Library. It's just thing after thing after thing. So that became really clear as we were hearing all these presentations, and I'm glad that the community in the town is making changes, but it's a lot.
All right, thank you. And as far as I know, I'm still not on the design review board, so no report from me. So second to last item on our agenda is report of the chair. All I'll say this evening is that I will miss the next meeting on May 6th or 7th, I think it is. Let's see, I think that's when it is, and Johanna
It's
will
the 6th.
preside in
Mhm.
my absence. So have a good time at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Doug.
Nate and Pam, anything you forgot to say earlier or that you want to say now? Should we give Nate another round of
Round
applause?
of applause. We're so proud of you, Nate.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I was trying to think of things, I like to use this meeting. So it is, live streamed and people watch it. I think there are some big topics on the agenda. So I think those are really important to continue following for, the board and the community. Yeah, Hampshire, I think it's thanks for your patience. I think it will come back. So just, when it's ready, staff will put it on the agenda. So, I know people had asked about it and the town issued a statement. I think, it's still things, people are considering and thinking about, but it will, likely come back at some point. So I'll just say thanks for your patience on that. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of work to be done. I'll be watching.
Nate, I will say on terms of Hampshire, we had at least a brief mention of should we reconsider the village center extent down at Atkins, just because the wetlands were more extensive than were realized on that other parcel that Archipelago was working on. And if we actually want a village center down there, should we change the geographic extent of it? So as staff is working on that, I think that's worth considering.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think all that will be part of the discussion. So I mean, New Hampshire owns most of the land is in Amherst, some is in Hadley, but it's a lot of property. They're still operational through next semester. I think, but with the announcement, I think after everything kind of settles, really I think will be a lot of discussions on how to move forward, and the planning board can be integral to some of those. So yeah, I think Doug, keep that in mind. I think that's something that will be on the table as well as other ideas.
Okay. All right, everybody. Anything else? Okay, time is 9:11, and we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
luck,
Have a
Nate.
good night. And good luck,
Thank you,
Nate.
Nate.
Hey, good luck, Nate.
Congrats.
Thank
Mm,
you. Thank you.
Stop recording.